Hello and welcome to Dev Talks. I'm Konstantin Usov. I'm a student here at HKS doing my MC, MPA, mid-career masters. Dev Talks are a series of conversations with senior policymakers and academics working on economics and international development, and is organized by the Growth Lab. It is my pleasure to welcome today Vladyslav Rashkovan for the session on the political economy of the post-war reconstruction of Ukraine. Since 2017, Vladyslav is a member of the International Monetary Fund Executive Board. As an alternate executive director, Vladyslav represents Ukraine and 15 other European countries. Prior to IMF, Vladyslav had a distinguished banking career, serving as a deputy governor of the Central Bank of Ukraine and being responsible for the banking sector reforms and central bank transformation. Just one more important thing, that before joining the NBU in 2014, Vladyslav occupied the position of a chief financial officer of the Unicredit Bank in Ukraine, also being engaged in leadership of the group turnaround projects in Central and Eastern Europe. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Vladyslav stands in the center of many international projects to provide financial support to Ukraine and plan its post-war reconstruction and modernization. Vlad also serves as a member of the International Advisory Panel for the National Recovery Council. So, Vlad, welcome to Dev Talks, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Konstantin. Do you hear me? Yeah. First, thanks to Ricardo for inviting. We discussed about this possibility in May last year, and I promised to come from November, but I did this only the first week when I managed to find, really like some sort of free week. Second is I'm apologizing to have this type of view, but the hotel did not properly made the laundry of the shirt. Three is while I'm working in IMF, here I more represent myself rather than IMF, as you understand, because IMF is not a development organization, but we more build the framework for future reconstruction. And what I do on reconstruction goes a little bit beyond the IMF, the mandate landscape, and more with my cooperation with the government, different think tanks, etc. For those of you who didn't follow Ukraine deeply, might be a little bit surprised of the invasion, but you might know that this is the 30th war between Russia and Ukraine, and not the first invasion, and not even the first invasion in the modern times, because the current war started in 2014. There were many others, and I've spoken at Yale and Harvard now for different students, especially those who study history. Clearly, they know it better. The current stage, we are in the war now, it's more or less already on the 7th stage. There were different moments of initiative coming both from Russia and from Ukraine. Now it's clearly initiative is on our side. How effective it will be, as Ukrainian, I strongly believe in that we will go as long as possible, and also reaching the borders of 1991. But it's very clear that there are many other potential scenarios on the table, and this is what we analyzed with some students. There could be, the war can end or continue soon, depending on who will have an advantage. In the next months. Clearly, Ukrainian, I would say, minimum target is to come to the war victory and return to the 1991 borders. But as I said, there are many other options potentially possible. Likewise, there are also some more positive, maybe developments, including like a fragmentation of Russia and change of regime in Russia. But may also end in a much worse situation, like in the Third World War and even nuclear war. I mean, Ukraine does everything possible to be on this side, to reach this target, and thanks to the Western, allies who help us with that. But what is more important is the end of the war is not an obstacle to start the reconstruction, because Ukraine controls the major part of its territory. Yes, its many elements are destroyed, but and moreover, the reconstruction has already started, and for that. We need to understand that the reconstruction itself is a very complex process. And it includes many different elements. We may say it's starting with maybe military, as I said, we still need to win the war, but also we need to release our prisoners and return deportees. But one of the major elements for the, from military perspective, considered is the potential reparations from Russia. We speak about $300+ billion of Russian assets frozen in different parts of the world, and there are many groups now who are working in order to develop the solutions on Russian assets. There are legal solutions, there are economic, there are financial solutions for that. I mean, this situation shows that it may be not so soon, because the political process is complicated in Europe, complicated in the US. Another element is obtaining war insurances, especially for the business. Again, there will be London conference soon, which will also focus on this topic, how to get it. It is very clear that the West became not prepared, or the global world became not prepared for such a big war, and therefore the need of such big war insurance in the world. We also need to have some sort of ensuring security guarantees for the future, one of which could be entering NATO, but not only. There is another working group led by the Rasmussen, the former head of NATO, on thinking what kind of security guarantees could be and how these security guarantees would not be a new Budapest memorandum for Ukraine, which will not be respected. On diplomatic side, there are clearly some peace-building initiatives. As you know, there is a formula of Zelensky about the peace. There is also now on the table the Kyiv formula of the peace. And as I predict, there will be a contest of different peace formulas from different players. Clearly, something will come from Erdogan, from Netanyahu, from MBS in Saudi Arabia. Maybe something will come from Guterres, from United Nations. President Macron already went to China, came with some ideas. Something will come from Ursula von der Leyen, maybe from Pope. I don't think something will come from Modi because he's a little bit outside, but Lula said he wants to be a part of the peacekeepers from Brazil. And, something will come from US. So I think there will be a lot of initiatives what could the peace look like after the war. But also another important element as a part of diplomatic efforts, and this is where I also play some role, is obtaining international aid and coordinating donors. In terms of the international aid, last year, Ukraine got $32 billion of international aid. Already by this February, Ukraine had 30+ billion commitments. And as of today, after the spring meetings, the commitments for this year are around $42 billion. So, and there is created the donor coordination platform. I will say a little bit later about that. One of the clear, paths, the task for diplomatic side is Ukrainian building path towards European Union, which is a strong anchor for Ukraine post-war reconstruction. Political, it's also not easy, post-war topics in terms of the reconstruction, because we speak about something which is not necessary, and I will say slightly later about that. Everybody wants to come to Kyiv. Everybody wants to make the pictures of Ukrainian leadership in Kyiv. But Ukraine is a decentralized country, and therefore we need to rebuild not only Kyiv, we need to rebuild a lot of the cities outside, and we need to build the proper relations between city and between center and between regions, and we need to ensure that the regions also have a proper absorption capacity and and money also for the reconstruction. Currently, clearly, there is a big gap there. But not only, we need to think about the elections. Now there is a martial law in Ukraine. During the martial law, there is no parliamentary elections, there is no president elections. According to the plan, the parliamentary elections were supposed to be this year, and the president elections next year. During martial law, they are postponed. So there will be an interesting dialogue, how long they will be postponed, and what different players will speak about that, including in Europe. And as you understand, also one of the parts, of the war is some sort of censorship, media censorship against Russian propaganda. which I think is absolutely acceptable. We need to return back to more free media after the war. Economic part is a lot of macro adjustments needs to be done, because the economy shrinked by 30% last year. At the same time, the budgetary costs are still very high. The deficit now is very high. The debt is pretty high, public debt. We need to come back to the issues of debt relief for the country. And this is also some part of our job, which we're doing also as an IMF program now. There will be a lot done for restoration of infrastructure, post-war economic development. And again, each of these elements, which I'm just saying, could be a book. Post-war economic development, I'm sure there are some professors from Harvard who wrote books about that. Likewise also, working on how to organize international aid. It's another book, and there are several of them about 90s, about 2000s, and I'm sure the Ukraine will be one of the case studies in the future. So if you as professors want to analyze it, please do that. Humanitarian part will be also an important part, not less important than restoration of infrastructure, because we need to understand what to do with refugees, what to do with internally displaced people, how to integrate them in the reconstruction, post-war reconstruction, how to help them to find a new place, but also how to provide them necessary housing, the schools, medicine, something which they don't have now because, big part of Ukrainian territory is destroyed. There are more than 700,000 families which completely lost their houses, according to the World Bank damage needs assessment. Social, another part important for Ukrainians is how to ensure justice. The issues of potential new tribunal for the Russian crimes during the war, starting from the soldiers in Bucha and Irpin to the Russian leadership. And there is another group which is working on setting up this tribunal, like Nuremberg type tribunal for Russia. In general, mediating post-war reconciliation between people who were in occupation and who left the country, between the people from territories which will be needed to be integrated, let's say in Donbass, when we regain Donbass. This will be a very important topic. Again, a topic for the projects, which could be led by the Harvard researcher, Harvard, professors for sure. And there will be a lot of initiatives coming from USAID, from US government to finance this. Institutional, also institutional process, institutional element is important in how to build this absorption capacity, how to I said yesterday during the panel that the agency which now is created for reconstruction is in the past was managing around $5 billion per year, a little bit more than $5 billion budget, and the needs are 400. So you can easily say about 80 years if only this agency will work. So it's very clear that you need to enhance capacity. How to enhance capacity in private sector, in the government, in this agency, outside of this agency, how to experiment with different agencies, how to do it from outside of Ukraine, inside of Ukraine. Again, this is a topic both for research, but more important for implementation. Technological, what we discussed yesterday during the panel is you need to get rid from post-Soviet, standards, technologies, go more to European standards, which is a big, and you need to do it fast if you want to enter fast in a fast track to European Union. But what is important, we need also to leapfrog. We cannot go to the same path like Poland or Hungary or Slovakia or Slovenia went 20 years ago. If we want, we need not to look to Poland of 20 years ago. We need to look at European Union in 15 years from us today. So European Union in 2035, how it looks like, because we need to target there rebuilding our institutions. And that's why we cannot do it without leapfrogging. Otherwise, we'll be lagging behind for so many years. In general, speaking about, what is important is that we need to work. Reconstruction means factually all this together in parallel, not consequently. We really need to work on this simultaneously. In general, when we speak about the definitions, we speak about the fast recovery, which is going now. There is the needs for fast recovery this year around $14 billion. We speak about reconstruction, which is more physical infrastructure, reconstructing physical infrastructure. We speak about modernization, which is more about institutions, but also, the approaches, cultural changes in the country. We speak about the structural reforms which are needed, and we speak about EU accession as anchor for us. Again, all of these together, not in parallel, not consequently. Speaking about the figures, we need to understand there are figures of damages, losses, and the reconstruction needs. And what I said yesterday, and this is done now by both by Kyiv School of Economics and World Bank assessment, that the damages until the war end expected at least on the level of $500 billion. As of today, after 1 year of the war, we have $135 billion already recorded, which means factually documented fact of damages for Ukrainian economy. $60 billion is a loss of our GDP. 290 billion is expected loss of the potential GDP because of low productivity, because of the refugees, because of the damages of infrastructure and economic capacity. $105 billion is immediate needs, what the World Bank estimated last time for the next 36 months. And 14 billion, I think, is more capacity for this year, what they expect both in the government and the private sector. Totally, the last assessment is $411 billion as a reconstruction needs for Ukraine. Together with Barry Eichengreen, together with Yuri Gorodnichenko, we estimated that the reconstruction needs will be at least $750 billion. But if you speak about investment needs for the leapfrogging also, it will be more than $1 trillion. And this is, as yesterday was saying, it's 10, 15 years at least job at the best. What is important, and this is another book, was differentiating about that whatever is needs, and this is what I was saying about needs, whatever is needs, whatever Ukraine is requesting, what is pledged by the institutions and national countries, what is later committed and what is disbursed are completely different figures. And they are also different from the absorption capacity. If you put today $100 billion on the table for Ukrainian reconstruction, there is no way to use it from any perspective. Institutionally, operationally, even banking sector will not be able to adjust this amount. Therefore, we need this to maximize, but we also need to maximize this and to decrease the gap between the figures. Speaking about the main part, and this is what we discussed with Ricardo last year during the conference which we organized together in London School of Economics in May. There are many embedded conflicts, or I would say crossroads, for the Ukrainian reconstruction, and they are actually the base for the political economy debates in the country. And I'm sure we can add many more, but this is, I see, major ones. So the first one is who is driving the reconstruction? Or modernization of the country. Is it West or is it driven by the Ukrainians? Ukrainians say it's our country, we are sovereigns, we will have our future, we own our vision, we own our future. The West says, guys, but we already saw it. We already saw it in other countries, how it's ongoing. Iraq, Afghanistan, later, okay, Iraq, Afghanistan, maybe not the best cases, as they say, but nevertheless, there are other cases, Hurricane Katrina, later they say about Indonesia, in Aceh, in Nepal, Mozambique, Sri Lanka. There are many different cases. Someone remembers Salvador, Colombia, so there are many cases where you can learn something. So it's not a unique case of the reconstruction after the war. And I think the answer should be clearly there should be Ukrainian ownership and the vision should come from Ukraine, but there should be strong cooperation with other donors. The second is about the conflict between short-term needs and the long-term vision. You can have a long-term vision that you will have, as we discussed yesterday, Amsterdam instead of Kyiv. But you need to fix the roof for hundreds of thousands of people who are staying as internally displaced people. And actually not 100,000, but they are 8 million. And you need to find solutions for them. You need to find for them modular housing today. And this is what UN is doing, UN Habitat is doing, UNHCR are doing in Ukraine today. Red Cross is doing, finding the possibility for interim, temporary housing. As you understand, as soon as you have temporary housing, this may stay forever. So you need to understand how to balance this, the short-term needs with a long-term vision. Later, there is some sort of rivalry between national players, like European Union, we will run the reconstruction. US is saying, and we, what about us? Canada says, we also want to participate. Turkey says, we also want to participate. And institutional support, World Bank says, or EIB, European Investment Bank, or EBRD, we will be the champions of Ukrainian reconstruction. Fine. None of them has a capital to do that. EBRD is seeking for a capital. European Investment Bank is seeking for capital allocation for Ukraine. World Bank has limits, so factually they also cannot do it. And we need to have more coordination here, and clearly we need to strive for the modernization of the country. There are many other topics. So should we speak more with donors and therefore potentially expecting only the grants, which is clearly more desirable for the reconstruction, but there is also a problem of Dutch disease. So if you have only grants, you don't need to work. You expect that others will finance you. Therefore, or you have, loans, which easier to give, but later you need to think what to do in the future. Already, debt to GDP, public debt to GDP in Ukraine more than 70% because GDP went down, and last year the combination of loans and debt and grants was like 65 to 35 last year out of these $32 billion. But clearly, what I strongly believe is not loans or guarantees or grants. The Ukraine can be reconstructed only with private capital in future, only with investments. And how to bring this investment, this should be the major task for the government. That's why the structural reforms is so important. I already said about the centralized country versus decentralized, strong capital versus strong regions. Ukraine is a decentralized country, so it should be clearly kept. So how to build the capacity in the regions is a big question. Democracy, strong hand during COVID, strong hand during the war. Clearly, or democracy and freedom. I strongly believe in democracy and freedom, therefore it should be preserved after the war. And also what we see now, there is a big increasing, again, during COVID and during the war, strong increase of the state role in the economy. And this, if we put it to the limit, and therefore everything will be state economy, will be small state economy versus big state economy on the north. Small state economy will always lose to the state economy, the large state economy. So for the small, open, liberal economy supported by the, economic freedoms, clearly will win towards the state economy. Last year, we developed this more or less mechanism with Ricardo in London. So there are like framework, which many people found it as relevant. There are some prerequisites which are needed for reconstruction. Everybody speaks about the principles of reconstruction. Is again EU as anchoring. There should be clearly transparency, Ukrainian ownership. If you put all people together who wrote about principles, you can have a big book already about that. Vision, this is what I said yesterday, so far is missing. Vision should come from Ukraine, but Ukraine now is more focused on short-term needs, again, and also on military, how to win the war. The long-term vision so far is missing. EU accession frame, there is a process. EU reframed the DGNIR department, so those department which is working on the neighboring countries, and they're developing a plan together with Ukrainians. Recovery plan, there was some attempt to develop it last year before Lugano conference in July. Unfortunately, there was no much traction about this plan. There is more now fast recovery topics, but other elements which are more important is how to finance, how to build the implementation capacity, how to build the governance around the reconstruction, how to coordinate donors. I will be happy to answer, to your questions. There are some slides which you all probably will use for that answer. And one of the question is, do we need to have some real champions or Mr. or Miss or Day Marshal, in the future? This is a good question. I don't know, or it should be individual, personalized leadership, and this is about the leadership classes of people, or it should be more institutional leadership in the current world. This is I don't know, but the politicians will play a big role in that, because unfortunately they will have to make so many choices, and they will need to think either they will sacrifice their careers, or they will make the careers. Maybe someone will make a career also doing the reconstruction well.
Thanks for this presentation, Vlad. Let's follow it up with just several questions and then open it up for the audience. You've mentioned that the reconstruction in Ukraine has already started. I'm aware of this, but as this fact probably surprises many, could you elaborate on who has begun the reconstruction, where, who pays for it?
Yeah, there are several levels. I give you an example. It was recently in Kyiv, and I went to Irpin, which is a city nearby Kyiv. And you might remember the bridge, which it was on all the pictures I think on March 6th, where people were evacuating from Irpin, and they were under the bridge. Totally, I think something like 90,000 people moved from Irpin to Kyiv under this bridge in the next days. So I was staying in front of this bridge, and I created something like a metaphor, which I think Ukraine looks like this bridge today. So the main bridge is still destroyed, like Ukraine. On the right side, Ukrainian authorities, Kyiv authorities, Irpin authorities, they built an interim road on the bottom of the river. It's a really very small, very narrow, but it's there. The cars are using it. This is how Ukraine is tackling fast recovery today. And on the left side of this bridge, the new bridge is already under the construction. And this is how Ukraine already starting. It's still far from completion, but this is how Ukraine already started. There are only two questions. When this bridge was started building, was there a proper tender process? I simply don't know. And the second is, and the builder is a Turkish company, which is also interesting, just in general, we appreciate all the investors. And the second part is this bridge built according to the 21st century standards on ecology? Is this road will be prepared for self-driving cars in future? How many CO2 emission was spent, for this bridge? I think nobody was asking these questions. And this is not a modernization. This is going back what we've actually tried to recover the bridge which was before. Spending money. If we do that, as I said yesterday, I think it will be the crime of the 21st century. We really need to make chance to rebuild, meaning modernize the country. So, if there will be this fast recovery, which first starting with energy, that Russia was attacking from October 10 with their missiles, were attacking the Ukrainian energy system. And only one day, I think November 11 or 15, there was 1 gigawatt of generation of electricity was damaged. If this would not be recovered, if Ukrenergo would not be investing in recovery, and they do it with the money of the government, they do it also with money of the dollars, including from US, they also do it with money of EBRD. If they would not do it, there would be very strong electricity shortage in some part of the country. And for a few days ago, Ukraine started exporting electricity, as Mr. Patrone said yesterday. While in December we had a huge deficit, huge. So we are recovering that. If there will be no recovery, this fast recovery, no single foreign leader will be able to come to Kyiv by train, by car, because it was ruined. If there will be no recovery, there will be very limited mobile connection, because the Russians were killing also the towers, mobile towers. So all of this, something is done by the private sector, they are building it. We were in Kyiv, and with Kristalina, you met with business. One person from business said, I had these 2 warehouses, total value $70 million inside. Both ruined, one I already rebuilt, using his money. For another one, for the new project, he started the new project. This is one of the projects of MIGA, of ensuring new investments in one of the parts of the city, of Ukraine. Another one said, I had one factory ruined, I already built it with new factories. So this is not only recovery, but also the new investments by Ukrainian companies. So both business, government from the budget, and dollars, they're financing fast recovery. The problem is, if this fast recovery is something you should do really fast, like a 3-month cycle, you cannot rebuild the country with 3-month cycles. You still need to have some longer-term vision what you do.
Just to clarify, are you aware who's paying for the bridge, the capital one? Got it. So the state.
Now you say as an acting deputy mayor.
The state pays for that.
Yeah.
And it's been announced that no international aid or financial aid whatsoever was used to invest in this.
Yeah.
My question to you, should there be capital expenditures in a quickly engineered and quickly designed capital projects in Ukraine at this stage, which might end up as being as outdated as something that has been destroyed before?
The answer to this question is could be a little bit provocative. I would say even more. Even there is a huge risk that this may be even destroyed tomorrow, it's still to be built.
Okay.
You know, because, you should do it. You cannot wait, what if there will be a missile tomorrow? You need to act what if you win tomorrow, not if there will be a missile tomorrow. So therefore, do you need to invest if this is like old technologies? Again, I told you about this conflict between the fast needs and the longer term vision. If we will stick only to the fast needs, therefore only for the immediate needs, and we do everything only for immediate needs, there will be a problem for the future. We will spend a lot of money, but we will not rebuild the country for the future. I give you again, we're speaking about the political economy, therefore it's more choices of people. Give you an example. You are internally displaced person 1, internally displaced person 2. Internally displaced person 1 got a temporary house, modular house. So now you build a new house. Who will you bring to that house? That who doesn't have a house or who has a modular house? It's a choice.
Just another piece of information. So there was no traditional peaceful due process to procure the construction of that bridge that you mentioned. What's your stance on this balance of meeting the sense of urgency versus meeting the due process that would, in its turn, project our readiness to be transparent, better than yesterday, and reliable?
Yeah, this is again a very interesting question when you look at today for today. Today for today, you always say for sure it's important to build today because you still need it. Therefore, your choice would be let's do without any tender procurement, any contracts, etc. If you find yourself with any that moment of life, you will always choose that option because you need to do it today. If you start including a little bit of, I will show you what exactly, these elements, which is a more model of the public financial investment management, PIMA, this is already PIMA C, including climate. This is the model which I developed, but this is actually including several models. So you start from needs assessment today. You do the strategy and prioritization today. For the future, you do programming. So you say we need to build city number X, or we need to build you will need to build the airports. So if you start today asking, do we need to rebuild this city or this airport? I would tell you, let's think 1 second more. Let's put people, urban planners from Harvard. Let's put the people who do strategy from MIT Media Lab, City Lab. Let's put someone from Amsterdam. Putting them together as a team to think a bit. And when you say to me there is no time, I will tell you that this is already 14th month of the war, and 13 months ago we should have started that. Not today, but if we didn't do it 13 months ago, we need to start it today in order to be able to build it. Because this process, because procurement only goes here, point number 9. Before that, you should have done a lot of the process. That bridge, probably for interim, you didn't need any thinking more, but for the main bridge, probably you need.
Just to build off what you've mentioned, so the Harvard Growth Lab, institutions like these ones, what should be their role in designing the policy, implementing the policy, and supporting Ukraine's efforts to reclaim itself. And the second part to it, just a little bit more provocative, do you think that there is enough open-mindedness in Ukrainian wartime government to build a cooperation with such organizations?
Answer to the second question for sure, yes. Because when you say government, I hope you don't mean only central government, because I said a few minutes ago it should go also on the regional level, and therefore to the mayors, and the mayors, why not? Mayor of Kharkiv would not be interested in cooperating and thinking about its future planning, But speaking what can be done, and this is a more practical question, but it's not what if. There are 30 plus think tanks in the world already engaged in Ukrainian reconstruction. Someone does that. We were discussing with Ricardo how Growth Lab can be implemented. There were some ideas before about the evidence-based policies, about the thinking about future European Union integration, therefore which regions of Ukraine may be more integrated to the European value chains, and therefore trying to work in a target ways with the companies.
But just for the sake of truth, Harvard is not engaged yet.
Yeah.
Neither is Growth Lab.
Yeah, and this is what I was saying about the championship. So this is like do we need a champion? And Ricardo may remember part of this slide, from last year, but you see the number of faces increasing. So there are different people who can play some sort of role. What if is a question. I don't know if you know that, and again, with taking out all the potential association, which probably at that time it was not super successful, but in the early 90s there was a Harvard Institute for Reforms in emerging markets, and it had a pretty big budget, and they were trying to convey the messages about the different economic policies which need to be done in the country. And truly saying, that time, I think it was some conflict between the IMF and this institute in terms of messaging about the reforms. But for reconstruction, we don't have such an institute. We don't have such a champion outside of Ukraine, which would be an intellectual center for the reconstruction of Ukraine, for modernization of Ukraine. Why it cannot be, and I would not say Harvard, I would say Harvard LSE or Harvard Science Po. Because it should be still, we're not in Marshall Plan concept, because we still have European Union and US, why not? And this center could be, if properly financed, could play a role as intellectual center for the reconstruction, and who could unite all those think tanks outside of the country, and who would help, other countries like European Commission and the, IMF, World Bank, EIB, to build this kind of intellectual thought, because intellect is here. Politicians are there, and intellect is here.
I was so glad to hear that mayors are ready. Is central government ready?
Yes. Also, we were discussing this during the spring meetings. We had several discussions on that topic. So far, the initiative is coming more from companies like BlackRock, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, rather than from Harvard, Yale, or MIT. But I do hope, and I do also my part of the job, also to institutions, to academia, also to come to play the role.
Thanks, Vlad. So we'll now open the floor to questions. If you have any, just raise your hand, please, and make sure to introduce yourself.
Hello, hi, thank you very much for the talk. I'm Clément, I'm from the Growth Lab. I was wondering about the one aspect that I don't think you've delved into so much, which is maybe what you could call the demographic reconstruction of the country. Beyond the let's say unfortunate casualties of the war, there's a lot of people who have left the countries, especially women and children. Now these people are building lives of their own wherever they can. I was wondering how you think about the role of this new Ukrainian diaspora in reconstruction, and how you would want to engage them, or also just build a case for them to participate in that reconstruction. Here I'm more thinking after the war ends.
Yeah, we discussed this issue slightly yesterday during the panel. Sorry for not mentioning this. I mean, and I said yesterday that as a result of the war, clearly we will have several important new social groups. One will come from veterans, and we may speak about probably 1 million of people. Including volunteers and veterans. We will speak about the families of the fallen soldiers. We don't know the figure today, but it will be also not small. We will speak about the internally displaced people, which is around 8 million people, and we will speak about refugees. These four groups, they will create another conflict between socialism and capitalism, or crossroad, because clearly their needs will be mostly social. And the government and politicians will tend to address their immediate needs rather than to think more about the longer term, because the immediate needs of these people will prevail. And I understand politicians. For the refugees, what you ask specifically, I'm working with UNHCR, which is doing with help of some Ukrainian sociologists service permanently, in different countries, what they're going to do. So the figures are showing that more people will spend abroad, more they will make a choice for their kids, and what they need back, they need security, they need housing, they need jobs, they need medicine and schools. All of these things, and again, as I said about the social things, you can try to do faster, but even fast, it will not be fast, unfortunately. Yeah, but you can do it really fast trying to do this. Like for schools, you need to build now schools or rebuild the schools to make the bomb shelters. Because people come back, especially those who left the country, they are, for internally displaced people, the schools to be opened, they need to have a bomb shelter. But at the same time, I think what is slightly missing as element is digitalization. So you may integrate these people, especially the kids, via more online schooling. How to do it is a question. It's a question to you also as proposals. What are the lessons from other conflicts, or how to keep students, kids integrated with Ukraine or with the country of the conflict, in a longer term, even if they stay outside. It's a question, is a task, for academia, for research, and the politicians to take a decision. Politicians can take emotional decisions, but hopefully they can make decisions which would be, the evidence-based and based on some previous research. Answer to your question, what to do next? I don't think the answer is how to work with diasporas. I think the other factor, is there anything which can bring people back? The answer for me is opportunity. So for the parents, you will need to make sure that there will be a job for them, plus all what I said before. And as soon as you do this, since we discussed about political economy, you are politicians, so who will you prefer first? Those who already stayed in Ukraine or who left Ukraine? And you need to build one house. Who you will give it? To one who was in Kyiv, staying during all the year of the war, or the one who left the country? It's a question for political choice. Because maybe you will not have $2 to build two houses, or at least you will not have $2 in a moment of time. You will have one after another, and it's still a political choice. How you sell this political choice is another art. How you work with your European colleagues in Poland, who is really happy to have 1 million of Ukrainian workers there, and ready to integrate them in all the economic policy, but not only in Poland, in Germany as well. Second year of study, kids will know German or Polish. It will be more difficult to reintegrate them. Again, answer for this, opportunity, and opportunity linked with reconstruction. We discussed that this will be a huge challenge, and for any professional, it will be a dream to participate in such a big project, especially if you are patriotic and want to help your country. and also if it's paid.
May I follow up real quick? Since my family's here and we're really considering, and I'm going back for sure this summer, and I'm also considering taking them home. I would say that the factor that I'm hugely analyzing is a factor of certainty. So I would say that I would ask you: do jobs together with housing, together with education and health care, constitute the notion of certainty, or there is something more to it?
I think we live in a world where certainty becomes a word very rare in general. So we live more in a very vulnerable and uncertain world. Further we go in future, more uncertainty. It doesn't mean that you don't need to plan. You know, as I said, you need to strategize more, you need to have more scenario approach, you need to be ready for good scenario and bad scenario, you need to have a contingency planning, what you do if. But what I see is the war. Ukraine now, and this is not pathetic war, Ukraine is fighting not only for its own independence, as we know, you know, because if Ukraine loses this war and the scenarios are different, you know, we believe as Ukrainians it will not happen, you know, but it is very clear that the West will lose as well, you know, and therefore I think everybody understands on the West, it's not only our war, it's really the war of the West. And of the humanity or humanitarian values, you know, the open liberal ideas and the democracy against of everything which could be antonym to that. Therefore, I strongly believe nobody will want to live, you know, Syria type or Aleppo type, you know, country in the center of Europe, and there will be a huge exercise for European Union also to contribute for its own, you know, rebuilding, because it will be, let's be frank, it will be a big business for the European business, financed by European capitals, you know, by different types of bonds which can be issued or other things. Again, it will be a topic for European politicians how they want to behave and position themselves in the future history. You know, so far, most of them, probably except few leaders, they clearly show that they want to be on the right side of the history. And I think after our victory, they will continue to do that as well.
More questions to Vlad? Professor Hausman, if audience allows.
So thank you very much for a very broad and encompassing presentation of the many issues. We last met in person in last May, and since last May to today, it's been, say, 10 more months of war, or 11 more months of war, and also of articulation of the international community. Two questions. In the last, 14 months of the war, what have we learned about the willingness of the international community to support Ukraine? And what does that tell us a little bit in terms of how solid is the support for the plan you just shared with us?
Ricardo, all the risks which we discussed with you last year, all materialized about the Western support. Nevertheless, Ukraine got $32 billion of support last year. Last May, we were only telling that it will be $5 billion per month needs. And even if Ukraine didn't receive any single month $5 billion, the maximum was, I think, 4.4. Nevertheless, $32 billion were there. And already for this, and last May, we didn't have any perspective so far. We knew only the amount, what we need. Now, already in February, $30+ billion was committed for this year. Now, we are in April 2000, therefore 11 months later, we have IMF program, which last May was not possible. the fund never financed the country in the active part of the war. And you may say about the period of 2015 when the fund did finance Ukraine, but that time the concept, Western concept, was that the war already finished and there is some conflict on the East, okay, which is, I think, one of the misconceptions of the West. And I was telling today in the morning to the Ukrainian students. And therefore, but the $15.6 billion of Ukrainian support is almost nothing against the total package which the Western countries already committed as a anchoring with IMF program of total $115 billion for the next 4 years, which already committed and embedded in IMF program. So there is a $115 billion commitment from the G7 leaders to finance Ukraine in a baseline scenario, in the downside scenario, and beyond, as it written in IMF documents. This is one thing which is done. The second element which is done, and we were discussing last year about the need of coordination of donors, and you remember how donors were saying there is no need of coordination, we're very well coordinated. They were not. But this December, G7, after our push for many months, G7 leaders said there is a need of coordination, and in January, G7 multi-donor coordination platform has been created for Ukraine. There are already 2 meetings, it's still to be improved, but the process is there. And without this platform, it will be very hard now to coordinate the international aid for Ukraine. The European Union, Ukraine in last May didn't have any perspective for European Union. It became now the candidate for European Union with some expectation of the plan, which is hopefully will come this year. And there is an intensive discussion. And as I said, DG NEAR, Department of Neighboring Countries in the European Union, European Commission, they recently restructured it to have really, a lot of people to be focusing on the Ukrainian integration, Ukrainian accession, and also on Ukrainian reconstruction. So there is efforts. US, we discussed last year grants versus loans. US said grants, and they provided grants. We discussed through which vehicles. It will be IMF, World Bank, special vehicles. Ukraine just give money directly. They used the World Bank, multi-donor fund of the World Bank. Last year it was not there. And they use the instrument. Moreover, the IMF created administrative account for that, and there are $5 billion moved from that account. There are, a lot of money went through the World Bank account, and moreover, World Bank does the certification of this money. They work. There is a unit which works with the Ukrainian government in order to cooperate, to certify the money, and they later certify this to the Congress. And only after the certification from World Bank that the money is spent according to the guidelines from the Congress, the next tranche is coming. The US created inspectors general. There are 4 inspectors general who already came to Kyiv, several, at least there is a report from January. I think they came twice to Ukraine, maybe once, maybe twice. And there is a teams which are built now for analysis of the support function, is support of Ukraine. So there is a lot of institutional building around reconstruction processes ongoing. In Ukraine, you have Vice Prime Minister on reconstruction who became a direct counterparty for both for US, for European Commission. There is the agency created for reconstruction. We discussed last year how it's better to be done. We wrote with Barry Eichengrin the article about that, how to build this agency. Yes, it's built not outside of Ukraine, but inside of Ukraine. But I know that article impacted creation an agency. And I worked with directly with the head of agency in order to structure it, now. So there is a lot of institutional process behind. The money will be there. Also, there is some portion of money already committed for reconstruction itself. There is $1.5 billion from US. There is $1 billion from EU, $400 million from Japan. So there is a process. These money are not comparable with the needs of 111 billion. But as I said, there are also the working groups on Russian assets, on other elements of the reconstruction. Therefore, a lot of things changed from last May, and it seems that it looks like the West is ready to support and commit to the Ukrainian reconstruction.
Follow up?
Any comment on within the West, who are the outperformers and who are the disappointments?
We are thanking all the international partners for support. And I would love to have a topic maybe here at Harvard, role of Asia for Ukrainian reconstruction, or role of Middle East for Ukrainian reconstruction, because so far it's still really the West. I mean, within the West, you go to the IMF, no, to the Ministry of Finance website, and you see clearly a few figures. First is money from US and the European Union. The third investor, first supporter of Ukraine today is IMF. Japan now committed $5.5 billion as G7 president, which will be disbursed fourth quarter this year, first quarter next year. UK did a lot. Germany provided 1 billion grant last year, and other contributions for European Union. World Bank money, and later you have EBRD in AIB, but they are mostly financing the enterprises. And one of the elements, which I said also today to the students, the Ukrainian students, is we need to build a proper digital system in order to track money, because so far we can track only the central government money, but we don't have a view on what is given, like between twin cities in-kind support, for example, or even like money to the state-owned enterprises as loans. We don't see it in the government official statistics.
I saw a hand on the back row. Would you still like it? Yeah. And please make sure to introduce yourself.
Hi, hello, my name is Felicia, also the Growth Lab Research Fellow, originally from Moldova, so thank you for your presentation. So my question was kind of related to your last point, that of, there has been a lot of support from the West. There has also been bilateral support, institutional support. At the same time, there have been some fragmentation within even the European Union. We recently saw Poland or Hungary kind of implementing those unilateral bans on grains. There's obviously also some criticism regarding allocation of aid towards Ukraine at the expense of other either countries or instances that will not be receiving that aid and that have been asking for it for quite a while. So how does this reconstruction plan kind of take into account, or your suggestion or your opinion on how does that take into account what the losses might be, both among the West, but also on how it's incorporating some of that criticism from outside of the West? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. Speaking about Moldova, you should know that Moldova in all the programs now in the West goes Ukraine and Moldova. This again about the political economy, in the different countries. In Poland, you have elections this year, so you make a choice between the local domestic political battles and some optics of Ukrainian support. Are there any countries which benefiting from Ukrainian war in Europe? I mean, you should simply think about a few things. If tomorrow there is still ongoing war in Ukraine for a long time, and there is a conflict which is ongoing, every 1% of the European GDP is $100 billion, which will be needed to invest, for example, for military. These are money which will be not invested in the medical, in health, in education, in social support of people. And all of these, what politicians now say about the grain, etc., this will be completely wiped out, all the potential short-term benefits. And this, again, between the short-term and the longer-term vision. Hungary is a little bit on different side. They chose politically to be on another side of the history. And this could be a longer-term problem for European Union, because for many aspects, it's looking like Ukrainians are more Europeans now than others, since few others. So it's a complicated. But even with Hungary, if we want to be in the same house with European Union, we need to find a dialogue with Hungarian minorities. If there is a dialogue. So if European Union finds a way for a dialogue with Hungary and not giving European Union funds to Hungary. So I think we also need to find this dialogue. All other issues are more, because I think Bulgaria also came today with ideas about the grain. They used the case of decreasing the grain prices, which is factually Ukraine helped Europe, to with inflation, also providing the grain. But now the local producers are not so happy. But the grain is going down in most of the markets. So it's a question more about local politics, how they wanted to use the case of Ukraine. They say, the politicians say that we will do only the transit. Okay, it means that we will work on transit. There is still believe me, so many countries which need grain in Africa, which are really in seeking for grain. But we will work on that. So I think it's more short-term political, battle, to show more domestically, rather than longer-term problem. On a longer term is this issue between the peaceful plans between, Ukraine and between difference between China, between the Zelensky plan and Plan Xi. In Plan of the Formula of Peace of Zelensky, it's written that we need to have a possibility to export free. And in Xi plan, it's written to facilitate the Ukrainian export, especially grain. Facilitate means what is going on today. When you need to agree with Russia, and Turkey about what will be done, there will be inspections. This is not, supporting longer term because it's limiting our export. And including that our export is not only grain, we also export metallurgy and many other elements. We also import many things, and it's clear that if you import them by ships, it's easier than to bring it by trucks. So I think this will be diplomatic topic. It's one of the diplomatic as a part of recovery, and we will do this, in the nearest time.
So would you take another one? We are running out of time.
For sure.
Thank you. My name is Bob Pell. I'm a fellow at the Harvard Advanced Leadership Institute. I'm an urban planner by background. I was really interested in what you were saying about decentralization and the cities and the combination of needing to create vision ahead of all the projects. So are the institutions in place during the war and martial law at the city level to allow that to happen? I mean, if funds were available to an individual city right now, could that city get all of the right stakeholders together to create that vision so that you've then got the platform for all of the rest of the process?
There are few answers to this question. If you go to Kyiv, absolutely yes. Moreover, Kyiv now worked with UK consulting company, one of the big four, on designing the strategy of the post-war reconstruction of Kyiv city. It is true that Kyiv was not so damaged, but still I think it was the right approach to do it now. I was participating, from the first days, on this. The result, I was not super happy, with the result what was got as a strategy, but I mean, at least better to have it, not to have it. When you speak about other cities, you come to the first issue is demand. Demand is there. The second question is absorption capacity. If you go to Chernihiv, I'm sure you will not find mostly anyone to speak with you. But yesterday, while I was on the panel here at the Harvard, I missed a call which we organized between Kyiv School of Economics in Kyiv and donors to design the program which would bring people both in Ukraine and outside of Ukraine to train to speak on the topics which you said, both city planning, strategy, project management, speaking European Union language, what means to be build back better managers. And this is, I mean, again, if Harvard wants to play a part of that role, it also would be interesting, I mean, because you also need leaders for that as well, but you much more will need people on the lower levels to do that. And the process will go now. I would say the cities of the second, third tiers, they missed that, element of the absorption capacity. But should be developed for sure, and will be developed.
So thank you to everyone for your thoughtful questions and contribution. Thank you, Vladyslav Rashkovan, for sharing your views and opinions. And I hope that we will all stand for Ukraine.
And please contribute to that.